Congratulations, true crime addicts. We've survived another week. It is Friday, August 16th, 2024. This week, California police discover a new serial killer, 5 arrests related to the death of Matthew Perry, and Alex Murdaugh may get a new trial. All this and more. Stay tuned.
Yes. Super excited. We are all pumped to have James Renner.
James Renner on.
That James Renner has zeroed in on.
James Renner once again drops a bombshell.
Investigative journalist, reporter, James Renner, who's been on the podcast, longtime friend of mine.
And we're back with more true crime this week with me, your host, James Renner. Hey, I missed you last week. It seems like forever since we've last talked. I was on a cruise, which sounds fun, and it was. We had lots of. We did some snorkeling, this and that, but it was also a research trip. I went on a voyage on the Rhapsody of the Seas, that is, and that is the ship on which Amy Lynn Bradley disappeared in 1998. That will be the subject of a new true crime book I'm working on. Probably won't come out until about 2026. It's a long, crazy process, but it's going well so far. I've talked to her family. I've talked to her friends. There are things in this case that have not been made public that are going to blow your mind and give a much more layered and detailed look at who Amy Lynn Bradley was. So I can't wait to share some of that with you even before the book comes out. So stay tuned on that. And as always, I want to thank Walter, my buddy, for manning the camera. Walter's just back from earning his PhD in breakdancing. Good to have you back, Walter. Let's get to the top stories. You're here for true crime updates. These are the true crime stories that you might have missed in the last week. I'm bringing them to you so you don't have to read the news. Who wants to read the news? Don't do that. Just come here every Friday morning. Here you go. Here's the top true crime stories everybody's talking about this week. Add another name to the list of serial killers apprehended by genetic genealogy. 73-year-old Warren Luther Alexander was extradited to California this week to face charges in the death of 3 women who were murdered in Ventura County in 1977, according to San Francisco Gate. 18-year-old Kimberly Carol Fritz, 31-year-old Velvet Ann Sanchez, and 21-year-old Lorraine Rodriguez were all found strangled to death in Southern California in 1977. At the time, even back then, police suspected the murders were connected. They just didn't have any way to prove it. Flash forward to 2022, and across the country. In North Carolina, investigators were trying to solve the 1992 cold case murder of Nona Cobb, a 29-year-old woman who was last seen getting into a truck at a rest stop on I-85. Her body was found later beside a highway in Surry County. Now, luckily, police had DNA from the suspected killer of Nona Cobb, and in 2022, genetic genealogists tracked that DNA profile to Warren Alexander, who was a long-haul truck driver who'd lived in California in the late 1970s. Once Alexander was arrested, his DNA was uploaded into CODIS, the national database of bad guys. And when detectives in Ventura County entered their suspect's DNA into CODIS last year, it finally got a hit. And Alexander was then linked to the unsolved murders out west. That puts Alexander's alleged murders at 4, but police believe there may be many more, potentially spread out across multiple states based on the killer's occupation. This is not in any way closed, said detectives. In fact, they're already looking at him as a suspect in the 1975 murder of Cassandra Lee Miller, who was found dead at a local motel in similar circumstances as the other 3 victims were. So, chilling, yet another serial killer who went under the radar for nearly 50 years, and genetic genealogy has finally caught up with him. So, how many more are there? How many are operating at any given time? It's a little creepy to think about. But their days are numbered. As long as you leave DNA at a crime scene now, you're going to get caught. So we're going to see less and less of this stuff. The trial of Richard Allen for the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German is inching closer and closer every day. If you aren't up to speed, here's a quick refresher of the shit show that's happening in Delphi, Indiana. 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German were murdered near the Monon High Bridge in rural Delphi in February 2017. If you're a true crime addict, you know about this case. This is one of the big ones. 2 years ago, a review of the records in the case revealed a very good suspect, 51-year-old Richard Allen, who was walking near the crime scene the day of the murders. Somehow, this tip was lost in the shuffle of all the other tips generated by this popular true crime case. At the time, Allen was working at the local CVS. Police finally arrested Allen on October 28, 2022, and a search of his house revealed a gun that matched to an unspent bullet found at the crime scene. Pretty good evidence. And after his arrest, according to prosecutors and police who monitored his jailhouse phone calls, Allen confessed to the killings at least not once, not twice, 60 times. This guy allegedly has confessed to the crimes. Some of these confessions were on phone calls with family and friends. Some were to guards at the detention center where he was being held. Now, there's a lot for his defense team to overcome, but they're trying their best to muddy the waters at every step, and this continued this week. The defense is arguing that it was actually a cult that murdered the two girls in a ritualistic sacrifice. They want the potential jury to hear silly evidence that Odin worshippers are responsible for the murders. In a 136-page memo to the court, the defense argued that there is overwhelming evidence that members of a pagan religion, hijacked by white nationalists, ritualistically sacrificed Abby and Libby. Narrator: no, that didn't happen. Odinism is an Old Norse religion that uses runes as sacred symbols, and it should be noted that there is no evidence that any child in the history of the United States has ever been sacrificed to the god Odin. The defense, of course, wants all the evidence of bullets and confessions tossed out. Earlier this week, defense attorneys argued that the sheriff misled and lied to a Carroll County judge in order to obtain that search warrant that discovered the gun. They say the sheriff failed to tell the judge about the possibility of Odinists being involved in the murders, according to WTHR. Judge Francis Gull called bullshit and rejected their request to toss the warrant and its findings, saying she did not believe the sheriff acted inappropriately. The prosecution, meanwhile, has filed their own motions to bar the defense from even mentioning Odinism. And as far as the alleged confessions go, the defense believes they were either coerced or a product of Allen's deteriorating mental state. The next status hearing is scheduled for this coming Friday, and Allen's trial is set to begin October 14th. If he doesn't accept a plea beforehand, I expect this to be the biggest trial of the year. Final top story before we get to cold case updates and all the fun at the end. The subtitle for this next piece of news is "Don't Fuck with the Press." The former police chief of Marion, Kansas, Gideon Cody, was charged this week with felony obstruction of justice for his role in a raid of a newspaper publisher's home, which may have led to the death of his 98-year-old mother, according to the Associated Press. Here's what happened. In 2023, a Marion business owner was trying to get a liquor license approved by the city council. The local newspaper, the Marion County Record, did a little investigating and found that the business owner had been driving around for years without a valid license. It's the sort of small-town news story that happens every day. It's what these little papers do best, focusing on local government and things like that. Yeah, it's not a big deal she was driving around without a license, but it might have impacted her business and the liquor license she was seeking. But apparently this business owner had some kind of friendly relationship with the police chief as they were exchanging texts about the issue, which was very embarrassing to her at the time. The chief, because he's apparently an idiot, came to believe the newspaper reporter had used a fake identity to obtain this embarrassing information about the woman's license problems. So on August 11th last year, Marion police raided the home of the newspaper's publisher, Eric Meyer. When officers arrived at the house, they found Meyer's 98-year-old mother, Joan, inside. She was visibly upset and told officers to get out of the house. She had also worked in the newspaper business, and she knew this was way overstepping their boundaries. Here's the thing, though. Joan died from a heart attack the next day. Her son believes the heart attack was brought on by the stress of the raid, because of course it was. But prosecutors declined to charge the police with her death, stating there was no deviation from how those officers conducted the search warrant that night compared to other cases, even though 7 officers responded to the scene at Meyer's house, whereas only 2 cops were sent to serve a warrant at a suspected child rapist's home a couple weeks before. Anyway, former police chief Cody was charged with obstruction of justice because prosecutors found text messages between him and the business owner asking her to delete their messages because he was afraid people might get the wrong impression about their relationship, which I hadn't questioned until just now. But now I wonder. He faces a potential 9 months in prison, but will likely get off with probation since it's his first offense. Meanwhile, that we know of, I should say. Meanwhile, the newspaper has filed 4 federal lawsuits, including a wrongful death claim seeking $10 million in damages. If awarded the full amount, it's conceivable that this lawsuit could bankrupt the city, since its annual budget is just $9.5 million. But as Stephen King once said, "Tough titty," said the kitty, but it sure was good milk. Those are the top stories. I've got lots more to come after the break, including the arrests in Matthew Perry's death and Alex Murdaugh's possible new trial. You're going to want to stick around. I'll be back in 2 and 2.
Please hang up and try again.
And welcome back to True Crime This Week. This next segment is brought to you by Pan Am Airlines, America's airline to the world. Yesterday, federal prosecutors announced that 5 people have been charged in connection with the accidental ketamine overdose death of actor Matthew Perry, according to NBC News. The 5 people arrested include 2 doctors, Perry's personal assistant, an acquaintance who procured the ketamine, and the drug dealer herself. Quote, "In the end, these defendants were more interested in profiting off of Mr. Perry than caring for his well-being," said U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada. Perry was found dead in his pool on October 28, 2023, after having injected enough ketamine to undergo major surgery. Now, according to the indictment, Dr. Salvador Plasencia learned that Perry wanted ketamine. So he reached out to another doctor, Mark Chavez, who used to own his own ketamine clinic, and they discussed how much to charge him. Here's what one of their texts said. This is Plasencia writing to Chavez. He says, "I wonder how much this moron will pay. Side note, if you're involved in illegal activity of any kind, please remember the sage advice of the information age. Dance like no one is watching, but text like it will be read in court one day." Perry allegedly ended up paying them $55,000 in cash for 20 vials of ketamine. His personal assistant, 59-year-old Kenneth Iwamasa, would inject Perry with the drug, and he injected him at least 3 times on the day of his death. Perry's friend Eric Fleming was also indicted. Iwamasa reached out to Fleming to find some more ketamine for Perry one day, and the feds say Fleming then went to a drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen. Now, if you're looking for ketamine, she's probably the first person I'd go to with a name like that. They called her the Ketamine Queen. That would be Jasveen Sangha. When the FBI raided her home after Perry's death, they discovered 79 vials of ketamine and several pounds of meth, mushrooms, and cocaine. Or as I like to call it, a Tuesday night. With friends like these, who needs anemones, right? All right, next story here. If there's one thing I've learned after hosting True Crime This Week for a couple years now, it's that if you call yourself a shaman, there's about a 50-50 chance you're going to end up in prison for something really creepy. In related news, 59-year-old shaman Ricardo Flores, also known as Coyote the Blind, was arraigned last week on charges of sexually assaulting 2 girls, one of whom was under 14 years old at the time, according to the New York Times. The alleged crimes took place at Ricardo's retreat, Sioko Shamanic Arts, which is about 65 miles east of LA, and authorities believe there could be more victims. Ricardo has written a number of books about his trippy ideas, which include access to a magical healing system and an ancient healing energy called Akadua, never to be mistaken for Haktua. That's something different. He also teaches mastery of sexual alchemy and sex magic, and he spells magic with both a C and a K, like a proper D&D nerd. Parents, don't leave your children alone with strange shaman. Alex Murdaugh, a.k.a. Creepy Eyes McGee, could get a new trial in the murders of his wife and son after the South Carolina Supreme Court agreed this week to hear an appeal alleging jury tampering, according to Newsweek. Murdaugh's lawyers are arguing that County Clerk Rebecca Hill tampered with the jury at his trial in order to profit from her book about the case, which I don't think anybody read because her book was pulled from publication after she admitted to plagiarizing part of it. His lawyers say Hill told the jurors not to trust Murdaugh and to not be fooled by the evidence they presented. However, the jurors are saying her comments did not directly influence their decision to find Murdaugh guilty. Instead, they made their decision based on how extremely guilty Murdaugh is. All right, I'm going to keep going, but you can tell I'm a little bit out of practice. I was gone for 1 week. It's all that sun down in Curacao, Naruba, the ABC Islands. Man, I got to get with it. Come on, James Renner, pull it together. Next story. How much is freedom worth? 71-year-old Glenn Ray Simmons got his answer this week after the City Council of Edmond, Oklahoma, agreed to pay Simmons $7.15 million for the 48 years he served in prison after he was convicted of a murder he did not commit. Simmons was just 22 years old when he was convicted of the crime. His lawyers believe police withheld evidence that a witness had identified 2 other people as suspects before they built their bogus case against Simmons. Last December, a judge exonerated him, saying there was clear and convincing evidence that he never committed the crime. He served 48 years, 1 month, and 18 days before he was set free, making him the longest imprisoned U.S. inmate to ever be exonerated. When asked what he plans to do next, Simmons said he plans to buy a new Chrysler Cordoba and a new tube TV to watch Laverne and Shirley in color. Let's go over to weird news, shall we? A Detroit judge has been removed from hearing any new cases after he went a little off the rails during a school field trip when kids visited his courtroom earlier this year, according to the New York Times. A group of teens were visiting his courtroom at the district court, and this would be Judge Kenneth J. King, by the way. They were visiting his courtroom as part of a field trip when a 15-year-old girl fell asleep for a moment because courtrooms are extremely boring. Judge King took offense and ordered the girl to change into a jail uniform and to be put in handcuffs. Then he asked her classmates to vote on whether she should be sent to juvenile detention. And let me tell you, that snot-nosed Carrie Sullivan certainly raised her hand. She didn't actually go to juvie, though, and the judge said he was just trying to do his own version of scared straight. But it got worse when the media reached out to the girl's mother, only to learn that at the moment the family does not have a permanent home, and she was tired because she didn't have a bed to sleep in. Judge King was ordered to undergo training to address some underlying issues, but maybe he needs a little time in a jail uniform himself to think about his actions. Over to pop culture, the new season of Unsolved Mysteries is out on Netflix. Remember when that music used to come on as you were getting ready for bed back in middle school and it would scare the crap out of you? I wouldn't be able to sleep. I think it came on Tuesday nights. I'd be up all night. You know what I mean. Anyways, are you watching this new season? There are 5 new episodes out now, and it's covering Jack the Ripper, a case of a severed head found in a forest that might be tied in with organ trading, and a locked room mystery from Trenton State College that's really interesting. And they also dive into the legend of Mothman. I always like those monster stories, the monster stories that they wrapped up amongst the true crime stories. Somehow those always fit together with me. So yeah, check it out. I got to watch the Mothman episode for sure. The true crime book of the week is... It's not exactly new. It came out in 2018, but if you go on the top lists of true crime books right now, John Grisham is, and anything to do with John Grisham is suddenly surging. He's got a new book coming out in October, which we're going to talk about, but he's all over the charts again. And here's one book that I hadn't heard of before that I'm definitely going to check out. It's called The Cadaver King by Radley Balko and Tucker Carrington. It also has a foreword by John Grisham. Here's the write-up. After 2 3-year-old girls were raped and murdered in rural Mississippi, law enforcement pursued and convicted 2 innocent men, Kennedy Brewer and Levon Brooks. Together they spent a combined 30 years in prison before finally being exonerated in 2008. Meanwhile, the real killer remains free. The Cadaver King and the County Dentist recounts the story of how the criminal justice system allowed this to happen, and of how 2 men, Dr. Stephen Hain and Dr. Michael West, built successful careers on the back of that structure. For nearly 2 decades, Hain, a medical examiner, performed the vast majority of Mississippi's autopsies, while his friend Dr. West, a local dentist, pitched himself as a forensic jack-of-all-trades. Together they became the go-to experts for prosecutors and helped put countless Mississippians in prison. But then some of those convictions began to fall apart. Here, Radley Balko and Tucker Carrington tell the haunting story of how the courts in Mississippi's death investigation system, a relic of the Jim Crow era, failed to deliver justice for its citizens. The authors argue that bad forensics, structural racism, and institutional failures are at fault, raising sobering questions about our ability and willingness to address these crucial issues. Kind of a different true crime story. Check it out. The Cadaver King. And those are the stories for this week. I will be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. And in the meantime, go out and enjoy the weather. This is one of those last weeks before the kiddos are back at school. Go do something fun. And if you're in Akron, come down to Porch Rocker. It's a lot of fun. And in the meantime, in the words of the incomparable Murray Saul, we gotta get down, damn it. True Crime This Week is a Fearful Symmetry production. Photo and artwork are licensed through Shutterstock. If you like the cut of my jib, I have another podcast you might enjoy called The Philosophy of Crime, in which I attempt to solve the big questions behind our true crime obsession by looking to philosophy for answers. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Sit, Brownie, sit. Good dog.